Hello, everybody. Grant Hunter here with Product Growth Leaders for another topic of the week. Steve, Cory has been getting really engaged in giving us ideas. And so this week I decided to go to Cory for some suggestions on stuff. And he had a great idea and it was like a paragraph long. So we iterated with you and we came up with this week's topic. And what we're going to talk about is getting to commit on a new product initiative, whether it's a new product or a new market. How do we do this process of getting to commitment to get people to back it financially, those types of things? What a great panel talk about this today. Of course, Cory Bryan is here. I was going to be disappointed if you didn't show up, Cory. I mean,
maybe it's your question.
Yeah. Paul Hurwitz is here, and Wong is here. And May wrote a dissertation for our Monday question, so we're going to spend a little time going into the dissertation.
Citations required.
Citations required. Actually, and Cory did a very good job of commenting on most things and asking other questions. So I feel like May and Cory, if Brian Weber was here to take care of the poll, it's like I feel like my whole role could be going away because Cory's coming up with questions and he's interacting in the answers. May is writing dissertations about it, and Brian Weber can do polls, and maybe I just don't need to be here anymore. Or I do. But what we did, we put the question in the community. What is the most effective way to get leadership to commit to a new initiative, market, or product? Drew Bartlett, who comes in every once in a while, has talked about getting sales to commit to the projections. And I know, Cory, you questioned on this. I just put in there today, I like the idea of it purely because if I'm, as a product leader or a product manager, putting sales projections in a business case, I sure as hell better have talked about those projections with sales leadership to have them on the same page. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm assuming when you said, how do you get most effective way to get leadership to commit, you're talking about corporate leadership. You're talking about the C levels. You're talking about higher level folks. And my question was, because I was confused, because it seemed like sales was more important than leadership in that response. And I don't know if that's true or not. I hope it's not true. Otherwise, everything is sales led.
Well, in many organizations it is. And I would say that
that's true.
The issue I have is I have gone to a business case to senior leadership without sales being on board with the numbers, and sales will be the first people to tell them they're not on board with those numbers. So me interpreting Drew was just saying, hey, if you're going to go to senior leadership with numbers that have revenue in them, you might want to have sales as aligned with those numbers.
Well, but that gets into that ridiculous thing where you have 16 meetings prior to every meeting and then 3 meetings after the meeting to discuss what we talked about at the meeting. But I know it's hugely political and manipulative, but you're right. I mean, you have to go work the VP of sales and make sure he's on board with the numbers, and work the VP of development and make sure he's good with the numbers, and work the VP of marketing. And, it's just like, holy moly, couldn't we all just, get along?
Yeah.
Isn't that leadership?
What?
Is it leadership, or is it just manipulating?
Steve, it's fun. That's always been one of the few things that I've actually thought that SAFe was actually good at.
What?
Yeah, I know. It's pretty controversial to say that, but the part about SAFe where, like, before PI planning or even during PI planning, where you get other people to commit to getting something done for you or getting the data that you need from them so that you can make your commitment, is like the one part of SAFe that I actually do think is not so bad. So that's kind of along the lines of what you were saying. So you like get everybody else to commit. You got to get everybody, make sure they're on the same plate with the numbers and everything like that. And then you can go move ahead.
So I get what you're saying, Paul, and maybe I should take credit for it because I did that 20 years ago before there was SAFe. So maybe I'm the person who invented getting all your stakeholders to sign off and be collaborative and get you what they need. Oh wait, no, that was Peter Drucker, I think 50 years ago.
Blame certainly when in doubt, attribute either Abraham Lincoln or Peter Drucker.
Well, we've talked about this before. He talks about product management and its role in marketing and innovation, and how part of that is collaborating with the whole organization. It's a cross-functional, and it's our job to engage with all those people. And I think May sort of was making this point. I think that's the critical part of us. The leadership joke we just talked about, right, is bringing everybody in and having all of them. This collaboration doesn't start at commit. It starts before commit to get them to commit. Mm-hmm. Paul Hatala, he said, tie it directly to things that they want to do or want to have, know, be able to do, and be known for. I thought that was a good way of looking at it. And then I got a dissertation from May. And so May, it seemed like this was a stream of thought that just kept coming.
I actually started with the stream of thought, and then when I was done, I realized I didn't actually answer the question. But I added the first paragraph, which is that there's a lot of work whenever you introduce something new, especially if it's significantly different from your core product, core competencies, either new market or like a totally new segment, or like just, if you're a software shop and you're starting to do hardware or vice versa, your everything is going to change, and it's going to need to change to support that. And if you don't have buy-in from any of the senior leadership and they don't like your product, they can kill it very easily. Even if everyone says, yes, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, it's not going to happen. So your number one priority is to get the buy-in. I was actually going to change my answer while you were talking, and I realized that we haven't actually talked about whether or not your new initiative is aligned with the overall strategy for the year, right? Because if you're starting up this funky new initiative.
Wait, strategy for the year? I didn't know strategies were annual.
Well, strategy for the whatever time frame you're working in.
I'm sorry, that's
right.
A little pedantic.
Or however long your thing is going to take, right?
Yep.
Because if you're trying to do something that's totally radical and different, and it's like this doesn't fit in with where we want to be, like if you're a hedge fund and you're trying to start up some thing that helps the homeless, I'm pretty sure you're not going to go very far. Yep. Yeah, so I think you just need to make sure that everyone understands that this is aligned with where the company is going as well.
Strategic alignment is critical for this getting to commitment, right? And Brian Weber had said, that's assuming you have a strategy, because too often what we see is there's not a strategy out there to be had. Joe Christoph had commented on your thing and highlighted one thing you said that I thought, I was complaining about innovation teams, I think last week. Anything handed off to production teams from an innovation team who then goes on to innovate on something else, that's a bad thing, right? When it says getting to commitment.
Yeah. One of the things I said would work or has worked in the past is that the initiative is driven by a dedicated team. So often people think of that as the innovation team, but that also has to include go-to-market, production support, and product vision post-launch, which is what innovation teams don't tend to do. So I think that's something that we need to think about.
They're sort of like handing it off and, oh, here's an idea, go.
Oh my God, I'm getting flashbacks.
Well, I kind of interpreted the question the opposite way. When I say I want the executive team to commit, what I really mean is I want them to commit the resources. So often it's like, hey, that's a great idea, we should totally do that, in addition to all the other things we've already committed to. So can you just do all of that extra stuff within the same resources you had before? And I was working with a team not too long ago, and the president said, we really want to go down this path. And I'm like, great. Are you committed to do that? And he said, what do you mean? And I said, are you ready to hire someone? And he's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, oh, if you want this idea to go through business planning and technical planning and go to market planning, guess what? You need a product manager. And he's like, we have product managers. I'm like, no, I mean, you need a new one because the product managers you have now are already fully consumed with their products. And to me, that's the measure of commitment. If you're doing a new product or entering a new market, the evidence of commitment is, to me, an executive sponsor and a full-time person leading the effort.
It's interesting you say that. I've been reading Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, and as those of you who've been on these calls before know or listen to them, when I say reading, I mean listening to an Audible. And, you know, it was nice to hear them talk about it's about focus. It's just too often everybody tries to do everything at once and they don't fully resource the things they can. So they're not giving full support to what we need and what we need to do to be able to get things going. And so whether it's a fully dedicated resource, these initiatives may be such that one person can handle two of them, but you know, don't have them at more than 100%, which I totally get with the commit there.
And by the way, when we're designing our process flow, that's why we embrace this product canvas. One person in their spare time can do a product canvas. I mean, that I can do that in an hour. I can do that in 15 minutes. But it's when you say, oh, well, now we want a 3 to 5 year financial forecast. Uh-oh, this is now real work. Oh, now we want you to go talk to the VP of sales and get some revenue estimates. And we want you to talk to the VP of development. Holy moly, this is now a whole job. So I can do a canvas as part of the, discovery phase, but the commitment is like, this is now real work and I need real people assigned to it, not doing it in their spare time. Of course, none of us has any spare time.
It's interesting. And I do want to get to Cory and Paul because both of them had answers in there. But what you just talked about there, Steve, really resonates with this concept, this approach that I learned from Frank Tate. We've mentioned Frank before, a longtime friend of Steve's, one of the better product leaders I've ever seen in action and getting to results. And what he said was for every product and market area they have, they've got a bank of ideas that they score, right? As somebody sees, ooh, this could be a problem we could solve. They sort of write it down and they score it and they got a backlog. And whenever the product manager now comes in the cycle, comes to a place where they've got some free time, as part of their job in their bandwidth, no extra money, their job is to go out and start doing interviews, right? And so they go talk to 5, 6, 7, 8 personas in the market, ask the questions about the process, the pain points, they map those out. They use that to do a survey to validate, which then is the meat for their business case, business plan to get commitment to not even a full product, but a $100,000 investment to bring UX design in, development in to almost get to a prototype or that type of stuff, so they can truly validate the product concept. And I thought, in a dual track, agile type way, I thought that was a great way of getting to commitment was, the product manager gets it to, based on talking to people in our survey, we have validated that this is a problem people want to solve. Let's get some funding to start prototyping and the product concept to get the validation again before we then commit to another $1 million or something like that. And so I thought it was an interesting approach. I didn't put it in the answer, but I wanted to bring it up at some point. And it was a great sort of segue from what you were talking about on that business case, a way to collaborate and bring people forward. Gets to May's points about that as well, that, there's sort of almost a gated commit, right? And maybe the product vision canvas is great for that first one, right? Let's go get people engaged and spend $100,000 to go more before we maybe do a full business case and plan if we're going to get the $1 million investment. Just some thoughts there on that one. Cory, you said make sure it fits the goals and directions of the company, assuming they have goals and direction. Tie it to their compensation and incentive structure, and don't work for assholes.
Yeah. Just to tie it back into that, vision, direction, strategy, the company is moving in this direction. If your thing fits in that, great. If it doesn't, then explain why, or explain or get leadership to see if that's a direction they want to go into. And to Steve's point, we could break down commitment to how do you define commitment? What is a commitment? Is it people? Is it money? Is it time? Is it whatever that level of commitment that you're looking for is? If you really want somebody to commit to something, you make it part of their incentives, either intrinsic or extrinsic motivations. They either want their bonus, and I've seen it used negatively several times, or negative impact, where somebody says, I have to do this to get my bonus. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to hit the sales number, and then I don't care what happens. So their incentives, ideally that wouldn't happen, but in the majority of companies I've worked in, that has happened, which is why I put number 3 in there, which is don't work for assholes, because they will screw you over no matter what the commitment, quote unquote, is.
I totally agree. You made me think of you talking about the aligning it with the strategy and the goals. And I'm going to go back to May's comment about the collaboration with the stakeholders, bringing them forward into the process. I think that was May. And I talked about the way Frank Tate did it. The one thing I did that always helped me be successful was I got my FP&A or finance guy to be a critical part of helping me put it together, because I always found the biggest skeptic in the leadership team was the CFO, right? And if the CFO, didn't get behind the numbers, especially specifically in a financial business case, I was up a creek, right? And having the finance guy and getting them, we sometimes play the finance people out to be like emotionless, purely logical, they're like Vulcans or something like that, or Data. I'm doing all my Star Trek references at one time, but I feel like if you can help them, we always talk about getting design and development to understand the customer and their problems and the value prop. If you can get a finance guy to understand it and see and sometimes you have to do it in helping them understand the value prop for us as the company, but getting them on board as an advocate for what you're doing, that to me is like a keystone, right? It helps bring everything together with finance person. Steve?
That reminds me of a situation a few years ago. I had done kind of a pitch deck for, I can't remember if it must have been like for the company, what we stand for and blah, blah, blah. And, the products and
that's what normally it sounds like. What we stand for, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. But anyway, I had done a pitch deck and I presented it to the leadership team. And afterwards, the CFO came up and said, what are your plans for socializing that internally? And I said, oh yeah, I'm meeting with the sales team next week to give them the deck and show them how it works and blah, blah. And he's like, well, could you come present to my team? And I lost myself for a second. I forgot that I was, anyway. And I just said, why would you care? And he's like, believe it or not, finance works here too. We care about the company we work for. And we are, I want my team to be as excited about the new products and the new markets and the new initiatives that we're doing as the developers and the salespeople and the marketing people. And it was just kind of an epiphany for me that they weren't just, gerbils back in a cage somewhere doing accounting while they were on the spin wheel. They were actually, fellow employees.
And to Cory's point, if you can find finance people who care about that stuff, not only do you want them to work for that company, but I want to work for a company where the CFO is like that.
Yeah, good point. Well, certainly ours was.
That's a great place to be. Where I've had ones who said, I don't like your thing, so I'm going to make the cost of capital on your project 20%, not 12%, just to make it the threshold that much higher. That's not the type. That's more goes back to Cory's asshole comment. Paul, you came with a pretty straightforward answer. Data. Yeah. Is hard data that's fermented a little and it gives a little more kick?
Anything hard is always better. Doesn't matter whether it's liquid or data. It's always better if it's fermented. Everything that we're talking about here, of getting buy-in, of getting people to sign off, it all boils down to data. You've got to convince people with data that what you're planning on doing is A, good for them, and B, good for the company. Going back to Cory's asshole comment from before, has to be good for them.
Is Cory going to win this week purely on his asshole comment? I think that's possible.
I mean, I don't know if I'm sure some of you have heard me tell the story of how I got into product management. I was working for a startup founder, and he had this notion that there were these 2 or 3 features that we did not need in our product. And because wasn't part of his vision, he said we were never, ever going to need that. And he was a very emotional, not a very facts oriented kind of a guy. So I knew I needed to go extreme to convince him. And I spent about a month and a half to 2 months talking to over 400 customers to get data of what were the top 10 features that we needed, problems that needed to be solved, et cetera, in our product. And of course, the 3 that he said we'd never do were in the top 5.
Yeah.
And I went to him with this data, and he couldn't refute that. I mean, it wasn't like I just spoke to 2 or 3 people anecdotally. This was half of our customer base practically. And he accepted that argument that I made to him, that we needed to be more customer and product focused and a little bit less founder's vision focused, and that we needed a product manager. And that's how I got the role. And then the company took off after that. So as I said in my comment in my post, if it's my opinion versus my boss's opinion, his will win every time. Yep. If it's my data versus his opinion, my data should win. And if it doesn't, I should look for a new job.
You're back to Cory's asshole.
Exactly.
Wait, that didn't sound right.
That didn't sound right now.
Well, I mean, Cory, you had replied with, I know something that Steve's used before is the James Barksdale quote, right?
Right.
Yeah, if all we have is data, let's look at data. If all we have are opinions, let's go with mine. Yeah. Because I'm in charge. Because I'm an asshole.
Well, actually, if he's willing to think about data, then he's not. But if he doesn't has it, he'll be the hippo. You know, Steve and I were actually talking about this earlier today, and we're like, data by itself is great. Data paired with human insight is better. I took a course called Marketing Engineering in business school when I was getting my MBA. I know, Steve, it sounds a little weird, but basically it was the science of marketing, right? How do you use data and that conjoint analysis and other things to help make decisions and that type of stuff? And on the first day of class, and I have never been able to find the study, and I'm pretty good at research studies and finding that type of stuff. The professor said research was done, and it's like the accuracy of decisions made purely on gut was like 25%. And the accuracy of decisions made purely on data was like 45%. But the accuracy of decisions made on a combination of gut and data were like 75%. And maybe this is just one of those things that it should be true because it sounds great. But, you know, in my head, I can get to the fact that if you can pair the insight and empathy we have as a human with data that supports things, it's not just the data, it's the combination of the data and that insight and that empathy that helps us make better decisions. Cory.
Yeah, the phrase data driven is something you hear a lot, and I don't like being data driven. I like being data informed. So let's take the data, let's look at some information like you're saying, Grant, and let's figure out what we can do with that data.
Yeah, and even when we teach prioritization, we say we want you to have a objective, quantitative method to score something, and then use that prioritized list or that scored list to make the decision. Don't just go with, oh, this was 1, this was 2, this was 3. There may be a reason something that was 3 should go 1. Maybe it's a short project that we can get, you know, morale up with a quick win or a window of opportunity. And we need to use our knowledge and our insight paired with that data. But it's key for us to get the commitment. Steve, your thoughts?
Well, you know, I'm still bumping a little bit on data, and I totally agree with Cory that we want to be data informed, not data driven. And yet I want to take issue, I guess, with what Paul said about, you know, always have data, because what I found is that developers love data. Technical people want to see the data. Salespeople want to hear a story about like a customer who said this thing. A single customer quote supporting your position is more compelling to a sales rep or sales management than data is. So what I learned was data for developers, story for sales, and formula for finance. They don't care so much what the numbers are because they don't believe them. They want to see where the number came from. You know, where did you get that number? Well, you know, I pulled it out of the air like we do all our numbers, you know, or better yet, you know, we did this survey, we interviewed 16 customers, we blah, 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 you know, we go through a process, and finance more than any other department loves process and formula. So, you know, when thinking about how do you gain commitment, it's not so much, here's my data, logical assumptions go here. It's still selling, you know, it's speaking to the buyer in the language they want to hear. And if the buyer in this scenario is a sales rep, tell them a story about a customer. Right.
And yeah, I learned that from you. So, you know, I completely and totally believe in that one. You know, and I think one of the key things that, you know, tied to that back in the day was it's about the assumptions. When we're presenting our business case, we present our assumptions. The math stands for itself. If we validated a survey and it said 60% of the market is really serviceable right now, if the CFO says, "Oh, I don't believe 60% is," well, our survey said that, but if you'd like to lower that to 50% to feel more comfortable about it, all right, let's just change that assumption to 50 to be more conservative. But the math is the math, right? Mm-hmm. You do them, you know, it just flows through with that. So I love that approach. And any last thoughts, Cory, May, before we move forward to the poll?
Like back to earlier when we were talking about, you know, the idea of like the innovation team doing the thing. And I think that's the difference between, so a lot of the times when you're like, okay, I want to start this new initiative, we talk about the idea of an MVP, and a lot of people think about that as like, oh, this is a project, we resource for this. And then afterwards, like, who knows what happens, right? But the assumption needs to be that we're going to succeed. And if we succeed, then the budget would either at least stay the same or grow from there.
Based on what's happening in the real world.
Yeah. So when we talk about commitment, I think we have to be very cautious when we talk about like building the very first thing, because that first thing needs to also include support going forward. Because if you sell the stuff, you can't take it back.
Yeah, Joe Christoph talked about the concept of tranche funding, right? Yeah. So you could, you know, fund certain, you know, I agree with that. I think you need to fund it through, you know, enough of a period that you have a chance to take something to market and learn from it without having to get the next commitment. But, you know, I guess I'm agreeing with you. Yes, you have to fund a project enough to get learning there. Cory.
So I'm struck by a thought here, which is we're talking about committing, and it sounds like we're asking leadership to commit to projects or initiatives or things like that, which usually have cost definitions, schedule, plan, people, you know, all those things. Instead, probably what I would want to see is commitments from leadership on ideas, on hypothesis, on direction, because those are more open, especially if you're working in the way that I want to work, which is an agile or a lean type of way. I want to be experimenting. I want to head in this direction that leadership has said, yes, we want to go in that direction, but I don't know exactly what that direction is going to end up looking like. And if I have a plan and a design and a budget, I'm kind of locked into that, and they're expecting something to happen as a result. And maybe that's the problem.
And that's actually why I like Frank Tate's approach, where it's like, okay, we think there's something here. Here's the data for it. We're going to commit $100,000 to go experiment and learn, so we can step along the way. But at some point, you have to have enough commitment that you're not just going, okay, we delivered this sprint. Do we keep going? Right?
Yeah.
That you can get further, and you have to have some boundaries for it, because if you're just doing this vague thing, we have to have, maybe part of those are some outcomes and some expectations of how long those outcomes are. I have seen projects that had this vague, yes, we should let's go this direction, just keep going over on and on and on and on. And people are like, oh my God, this is a great idea. But that's how you never get to a deliver, because at some point you have to so completely agree with experimentation and iteration. At some point, though, there has to be a output or outcome that we're happy with.
Absolutely, and that kind of leads into what my answer was on the poll, because I was struck by all the options, but there was something that was bugging me, and I think Allison hit on it in the poll answer.
What a great transition! Instead of Paul Hurwitz, flubbing the transition by having to comment something, we've got Cory Bryan actually seamlessly leading into the poll. The poll question this week was, what is the hardest part of getting leadership to commit to new initiatives? And we had a great participation rate on the poll. The options were building out the financial business case, gaining support across stakeholders, overcoming the often wrong opinions of leadership, just getting a time with leadership to present the initiative, and other it depends. And, Cory, to your point, Allison Goodman came in and said, for me, it's been that they get distracted by the new shiny object and the next thing. I'm able to build out a business case and get initial buy-in. But fast forward 1 or 2 months and they're already thinking about the next thing. I wish he was here, because I'm assuming that I would have voted for that being overcoming the often wrong opinions of leadership, but I could see that being an other with that.
That's what I took it as an other, more specifically of leadership committing the time that we're going to do something on. Like, we're going to head in this direction or work on this thing for 3 months or $100,000 or whatever you want to call it. And we're not going to interrupt them unless, COVID happens or some other unforeseen big thing, right? It's not just, there's a new shiny object or Doug from Up saying squirrel. It's what are the actual things we're going to work on, and we're going to commit to you the time to work on that, to explore it, to figure out all the things.
And in that, there has to be this agreement that if, as we experiment and learn things, or if as COVID or other things happen, if the assumptions we base this business case on change materially, either we prove them invalid as in our experimentation, or something else in the market changes. The iPhone comes out and totally disrupts having a keyboard, right? BlackBerry should have been changing stuff back then. We have the ability to say, wait a second, let's put the brakes on this and stop something that, because too often I see people get commitment based on assumptions. And as they move through the validation and iteration and experimentation, those assumptions are proven wrong. Yet they just the momentum just keeps them going and delivering on it. So I think there's a two-way street on that. What did you vote for, Cory?
That's what I voted for, was other, because
other?
And now that I'm thinking about it, the comment I made earlier to Steve is, what is a commitment?
Yeah.
What do you define commitment as? Probably you should define time as part of that commitment, not only money and people and the other things we talked about, but time should be part of that as well.
Sort of like that three sides of the triangle, right? You can change two, you can control two, the other one you can't. Steve, did you vote?
I did indeed.
You were getting so good at voting. I'm so proud of you.
Yeah. So I voted for overcoming the often wrong opinions of leadership.
I put that in just for you.
I wondered maybe if I even wrote it, based on the fact that I gravitated to it. So, I've got, without going into too much detail, I do have a sense that for so many executives I've encountered, it's like they don't know how work gets done in their company. I like to say one sentence from an executive is months of work for other people. And they have ideas faster than we can, address them.
Yeah.
And then there's also, I see your data, but I talked to a guy yesterday at the airport, and you're like, wow, N=1, man. An anecdote is not data.
To a CEO who came from a sales background, it is.
Totally.
So, May, I also was working on what I'm going to call the May Wong experiment. Can I craft all of the answers to turn into one Uber answer, right? So the problem is just getting time with leadership. But when I get with leadership, I often have a hard time overcoming the opinions of leadership. So I really need to gain support across stakeholders to help me build out the financial business case. Remember how you did it last week? The May-Wong paradox score. That's perfect, right? If I do a good job with the options, you can craft a whole answer.
I'm sure this is true. So I understand that just getting a time with leadership to present the initiative is important, but like all you have to do is get the top person, and then all of a sudden everyone's schedules becomes free.
Yeah.
So that is the trick to booking important people, by the way.
What did you vote for?
I voted for gain support across stakeholders because obviously, it's what I talk about all the time. But I understand, overcoming people's opinions. I mean, if I were working somewhere again in a place where leadership is often wrong, like even in the face of data, I don't think I want to do that again. So I wouldn't work there.
Actually, it's making me think about
goes back to Cory.
Cory's asshole.
Work for assholes.
Phrasing.
Phrasing, yes.
Let's see. Building up the financial
we
case.
now are going to have to mark this podcast
adult material.
And there's only 4 people here, so only 4 people are going to get the joke.
Oh yeah, true too. And I want to come back to that joke in a second, but I interrupted you, May. Keep going.
This is harder when I don't know if I'm sure about it. Building up the financial business case is hard. And like back to my my dissertation in the original question, like one of the times that we had built out an entire business case for this really big thing, like it took 8 months to build, lots and lots of resources. I know you're laughing, but like that was fast in that organization, Cory. Okay, but like building up the financial business case. So we went to all the different stakeholders. By we, I mean like the person who actually was the PM. I went to all the different stakeholders, and including sales, and they built out this beautiful business case. And they're like, yeah, we're gonna sell this thing for like X millions of dollars per user. And then at the end of the day, when we finally launched this, like there was a bit of back and forth, but they're like, yeah, this looks reasonable. At the end of the day, they sold it for hundreds of thousands per not per user, like per client. So it was an order of magnitude off. And like the amount of resource you pour into something like that, like it's just not. Anyway, so building out a financial business case, numbers might be made up, but that's why finance doesn't trust us.
But it goes back to that whole, what are our assumptions on it? So, I was considered a master pro forma guy. I could build a pro forma, a 3-year NPV and assumptions for top line and costs. I was good at that. My GE background helped me with the understanding the FP&A aspects of it. Yeah. But to your point, it's always like, where are those numbers coming from? How do we do it? And I think, even if you have that done, if you don't have the support of the stakeholders, both, sales with the top line, as we talked about earlier, but development with the estimated cost and time to do it, and marketing and sales on how do we, or marketing and support on how to cost to market and support it, right? All these factors need to come in. And that's why I also voted for gaining support across stakeholders, which won with 35% of the vote, although building the financial business case was pretty close with 28%.
Yeah.
Cory.
Yeah, I put something in the chat earlier because it kind of struck me when we were talking about data, and May, when you were talking, it made me think back to is what's the evidence that we have that this thing is a good idea, or that customers will buy it, or that they will, whatever. If you spend 8 months on something, which is ridiculous to begin with, but based on assumptions and those assumptions don't pull it out, what did you base that assumption on? Was it a guess? Was it a conversation?
No, it was a lot of conversations, a lot of guesses. Like it was at the time it was reasonable. And then the market just like flipped itself over, and also just like salespeople are afraid to sell this thing, right? They're like, this is the thing we've already sold. What the hell are we doing with that thing, right? Like I don't want to deal with it.
I'll
They're
just put it
like,
out there that that's what I'm
yeah,
looking
but
for
like,
is more
again,
evidence.
it's a whole
Yeah.
lot of different things, which goes back to gaining support across the stakeholders, right? Is your sales leadership going to enforce the revenue targets that they've set for this product? Are they going to enforce quotas or something like that for this product? Are your support people going to agree to support this thing, or they're like, oh, it's a pilot and it's been in pilot for a year, like we're not supporting it, we don't care, it's on prod. So literally any of your other stakeholders could kill your new initiative, even though you've officially gotten buy-in in the first place. There's a lot of things they can do to make it not work,
Well,
right?
yeah,
So-
and I'm going to go to, Cory, you didn't say the second part of your evidence, right? Maybe it's not just in the data, it's evidence. Data is part of that, but you can lie with data just as everything easily, right? There's what's the old saying, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics, and you can make the data say what you want it to. And guilty, right? I've done that before. I know how to frame the data to make my case to do it.
Yeah.
This is where I like going to Roger Martin's concept of what would have to be true, right? And so if we're getting stakeholders engaged, or even the leadership team asking the question, for this, what would have to be true, and using that as a point of evidence and validation for that, I think that's a great way to start, moving things through commitment in a way to do it. Steve, any thoughts before we move on to our question? Because we're probably only gonna have time for one question today.
No, I bumped on some of the data rants that you were doing, and I was looking for the quote that I have, and I'll source it later. But I remember one of my favorite quotes is, if you torture data long enough, it will admit to anything.
I like that.
I do like that. I like that a lot.
So if I can find who originally said that, and I wish I could take credit for it, I'll post that in the show notes.
All right, sounds good. We're going to ask one question for the lightning round, and we've talked about a whole bunch of stuff about beginning commitment. As a product leader, what can you do to help your team navigate getting to it and getting an initiative to commitment? Right? I as a product leader did it the wrong way. I just said, okay, let me take over, and I started doing it, right? But that doesn't teach them to fish. That doesn't help them build it. We want them to have ownership, do that type of stuff. As a product leader, what can you do to help your team navigate getting an initiative to commitment? I'm going to start with Cory because looks like he's questioning what he's going to say.
My initial answer is teach them how to map it out, and to get from point A to point B all the way through it. That seems like a lame answer though, and I don't think it's the best one, but it's the one that is in the front of my head, is teach them how to get from point A to point B, let them do it, question every step along the way, and then make it better. Make it a better argument, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. So to help them with understand the process and how to get from point A to B, which is fairly macro.
Yeah.
May.
I would like to extend on that answer, which is like, I wouldn't help them I would ask for their plan. So I would say, what's your plan to get commitment? And then just make sure that everything is covered. But also, if this is something that impacts at a higher level, you need that executive, even as a product leader, if you don't feel like you have the sway or the power to impact at the level you need to find an executive sponsor who's like, yes, this is going to be my baby. And that person is going to prevent it from falling off the bandwagon in 2 months.
I love the executive sponsor, and I'm going to push on the macro level of Cory's, what's your plan to get from A to B, and May, your, what's in the plan. I'm going to say, as a product leader, we actually have to help them understand what is A and what is B, right? And what are those components that should be in their plan? Because, if I'm not doing, I will stop short of doing it for them, but saying, okay, here's the outline I want you to have. Here's the outline I want us to consistently use when we're putting an initiative for commitment. Is we hit these points. We have our strategic positioning. We understand the positioning. We've got our pricing. We've got our value prop work done to understand the value prop. We've got our stakeholder commitments and we've got a pro form or whatever it may be. I feel like I may need to give them a little, I guess it depends on how senior the team is. I need to give some consistency in how we do this because I want, as a product leader, I want the leadership team to be looking at not apples and oranges and pineapples when 3 different people from my team come to present. I want to show that we're systematic about how we do this. And I'd probably go there. Steve.
Well, I have so many thoughts there. The first thought I would say is to channel some stuff from the wonderful book called Nailed It by Matthew Marvin. He says most people go on job interviews with absolutely no preparation, just figuring they can wing it. And as you're talking about this, I realize I've had that meeting as well with leadership, that I'll just wing it, and so I would say as a product leader coaching others, I would certainly help them prepare, but then also help them defend them in real time. I spoke once to the board of directors and they asked me some question and I answered it. And then the board members started arguing with themselves about whether we should put more of our focus on this part of the business or that part of the business. And I was sitting there just kind of befuddled that even the board can't agree on what business we're in or what the vision is for the business or where we're moving forward. And I kept kind of glancing over at my boss saying, when are you going to step in and either shut this down or at least defend me? So I guess that's it. Prepare as you should for an interview. Really prepare for this presentation or the commitment that you're trying to get. Be sure that you're clear on what you're asking for. I want to hire a person. I want to put together a team. What is our ask? And then as their boss, defending them when the wheels come off the bus.
Providing the air cover.
Yeah.
To help them do that. I love that, Steve. That's some great tangible stuff for us to work with. A couple things just coming back into the show notes. Steve, you said if you torture data long enough, it will confess. Is Ronald Chose, British economist and author. I love that data. We'll have to make one of our little quote placards that we use on social media for that one. And May, you actually were, when Steve had offered that the one sentence from a leader could be months of work, and you referenced the John Cutler article about what doesn't end up in Jira, and often it's not the Jira issue; it's the senior leader with one sentence that changes everything. And I'm always a big fan of John Cutler. So
after all, it wouldn't be that hard, right? I mean, it's just this little change. Oh wait, it touches every part of the product.
And it's a tail wag the dog.
My management rule, of course, is nothing seems hard to the people who don't have to do it.
Yeah. So, all right, we're going to move to our lightning round this week. And we got a little time, so it can be a rolling couple bolts, not a whole thunderstorm. What is the most important outcome of a good commit process? And I'm going to start with May.
Well, the outcome is you get what you wanted to accomplish. I mean, that is
you get a commitment to it, or you actually accomplish it.
You actually accomplish it, right? Like I think there's a lot of signs that tells you when things go wrong, but there is like the whole point of this process is to get to the outcome that you want. Like customers are happy with your new product, your new direction, your new whatever. And that includes everything that touches the customer. So the whole product is the outcome that you wanted in the first place, or better.
I love that. We went to a different direction than I was thinking with the question, but it makes total sense. Cory Bryan.
Yeah, that answer that May just gave is so important. It's what happens after, right? We're talking about outcomes. It's what happens after. So after the commitment, after the thing has been built, deployed, used, whatever, it's what you hope to achieve, you've achieved. So I think that's positive. To flip it, I would say daily, what's the most important outcome is the commitment still exists. Day to
Ooh, I
day,
love
it's
that.
still there. It's, today. Do we have to worry about this thing getting canceled today? No. Great. Let's keep going for another day. Maybe it'll last just one more day.
I love that. I love that. Steve.
I would say the most important outcome is a decision. It doesn't have to be a yes, right?
A
Sometimes
clear decision.
for prayers.
Clear, yes.
Sometimes
Clear.
no.
Yeah. But it's clearly yes or no.
Yeah, yeah. And I used to work with a lovely woman who was the president of a fairly big software company, and she was so agreeable, but she couldn't choose. She couldn't say, well, I prefer coffee or tea. She's like, whichever, and so getting a really solid no out of her was as successful to me as a good solid yes, right?
Yep.
So a solid answer, and in support of Cory's point, a continued support for whatever that answer was, yay or nay.
Cory, you have a comment?
Yeah, I want to build on what Steve said too, because I think not only is it getting an actual answer, but one of the most important outcomes for me in a process is feeling that I did everything that I could. That our team presented a good argument. We had the right information. They could choose to go either way, but I did everything I could, and my team did everything I could to make that clear answer, that I didn't leave anything out. That's my biggest
What a
regret.
great growth mindset, because it's not about the decision. It's about what you did to get to that decision. I love that, Cory.
Can I yes and that as well?
I'm not even going to get a chance to put my answer in. Yes, you can, man.
But, too bad, Jen. Yes, and also that leader who says, yes, we will do this, or no, we will not, they own that response. They own that decision, and they are then responsible for carrying that out across. Like they might not have to execute on it, but they have to stand by it when they're in front of their peers.
Oh, I love that. And I'm going to start putting some of these things together as a yes and, but right, when you get a clear decision, when you do everything you can and get a clear decision, and the leader owns that decision transparently, positive or negative, good or bad, and the commitment exists in I won't say perpetuity, but as long as it, to support the decision until factors change what that decision should be, and you accomplish what you want. The most important outcome of a good commit process is we are focused on the right things, right? If all those things work together, the most important thing to me is not the one project, it's all the projects. We know that we're getting clear decisions. We know that those decisions are being made transparently and people understand why. We know that our job is to put the best work we can into those, presenting those cases. And we know that the company is focusing our resources on the right things. And to me, that's, those all come together to do that. So what a great conversation. I never thought that commit process could get this much conversation going, but, from, May's leadership stuff to Cory's don't work with assholes. I did it better that way time, Cory.
Thank you.
To conversations on data and everything else. What a wonderful conversation. I say it every week. I learn every week. I really appreciate it. So, we do this every week. Monday, the question goes in. Wednesday, we do the poll, and Fridays, we have these wonderful conversations. To Paul and May who've left, Cory, my partner, Steve Johnson. We'll see you next week in the community. Thanks, everybody.